Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Friday, March 25th, 2016, and I'm in Comanche County, Oklahoma, visiting with Ira Kennedy. Mr. Kennedy is being interviewed as part of our Cowboys in Every County Oral History Project. Mr. Kennedy, let's begin by learning a little bit more about you. Could you tell me the year you were born and where you were born?
Okay. I was born in 1938, October the 4th, in south central Oklahoma, a little town of Elmore City in Garvin County.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about your parents.
Okay. My parents, on both sides of the family, homesteaded in this area. On my father's side, they came in from North Carolina, and on my mother's side from Tennessee. And they came to a little town of Katy, Oklahoma. And that's where my grandfather on my father's, or grandparents on my father's side is buried. My grandfather lived to be 103 years old, and so he had a very long life. They came into that area, farmers on both sides of the family, and that area was a big broom corn producing region, which is a crop we don't grow anymore. But that was the main crop in that general area at that time. And they was a big family on my father's side, 10 children, and on my mother's side there were 6 children. Mm-hmm. And still, I was born and pretty much grew up there. And as a lot of times during the Depression era, some of them finally, I don't know why they were going to California, but they were going that direction. And I had one uncle and aunt that stopped on the high plains of Texas, at La Mesa, Texas, and then had an uncle that went on over in the Rio Grande Valley. And we moved out there in 1941. It was an irrigated region, and that was during the war, World War II, and we moved back to Oklahoma, the same place, in 1945, and that was when the war was over. And have lived in that area pretty much ever since. And grew up, went to school at a little 2-teacher country grade school named Parks. Till I got out of the 8th grade, and then we went to high school, a little town there, like I said, Elmore City. When we got out of school, didn't know what we were going to do. It was mostly either farming or oil field, big oil field country. And I didn't have the resources to make a go of it, but we wanted to stay in the farming business. And I didn't particularly want to go to, or in the oil field. So several of my classmates were going to college, and I came home one Saturday night. We all went to town on Saturday night as country boys, and all my friends were going to take off to college that Sunday. And I came home and told Mother I thought I'd just go to college, and I was the last resort. I had 3 brothers and a sister. And all of them had made attempts at going to college, and not any of them succeeded. So when she found out that I was interested in going to college, she was just totally elated. And so she said, well, what are you going to need? And I said, well, I don't know. I've never been to college before. So anyhow, when we got ready to go that afternoon, everything she thought I needed, she put it in my pillowcase in a paper sack, and that's when I took off to college. And so I went the first 2 years at a little junior college down in Murray, Tishomingo. And at that time, I thought, didn't know whether it was going to continue or not. Well, I was very unfortunate. I lost my father my second year when I was a sophomore in fall that year, and he passed away. And they were in the poultry business, had about 10,000 laying hens. And I told Mother, I said, well, if you could make it till the semester's over, then I can stop and get out and come home. Well, for some reason or another, she had gotten out of the poultry business before I had a chance to come home from college. And I don't know whether that was intentional or what. So anyhow, after that, I went on up at OSU in the fall of 1956.
Why
And,
OSU?
Well, I guess that's a pretty good question. About all we knew was agriculture, really. We farmed, and I was in the FFA, and very big in the FFA. I was a state officer, and I don't know. We never did consider anywhere else. And that's kind of a good question. When we moved to Lawton here, I got acquainted with an attorney here, and I did a lot of work for him. And I often said, if we had been, shown other occupations and other things, we might have done something else. We might have been a lawyer, or we might have been a doctor, I think we could have if we wanted to, but it was just pretty much, in the agriculture part, straight on. And so.
Have you ever, before going to OSU, have you ever been to Stillwater before?
Yeah, we went up there we had all of our FFA conventions there on campus, and we made it up there. Back in those days, I remember we stayed in, that was before they had the big dorms, and we stayed in, there were several buildings. We did stay, I remember, in Cordell Hall. The Cordell Hall was really, I don't know if it's even still there or not, but it was one of the newer, and then Bennett Hall was one of the new, at that time. And of course they built all these others, all new ones since then, and I guess some of those, I've understood it, has already been torn down, so.
So after Murray College, you're getting ready to go to Stillwater. How do you get to Stillwater?
Well, my first car was a little 39 Chevrolet, and I drove it backwards and forth when I was going to Murray. And then my brother had a little better car than that, and we went, I had Dad, and we drove, but we didn't ever come home very often. Another era of when I was at OSU that I worked at the barns, at that time. They had the sheep barn and the hog barns and the beef barns, and as I indicated a while ago, I worked for the animal husbandry department. It wasn't the animal science department. And I got acquainted with some of the professors, and I think this was one of the real advantage was the fact that where we worked the department, we got well acquainted with most of the animal husbandry professors at that time. And the first year I worked and stayed at the sheep barn, and the sheep barn's still there, that we stayed and lived in. And we worked of a morning, we'd have to get up and do chores about 4:30 in the morning, and then we'd go to class and come in the afternoon and do chores. And we did that 5 days a week, and then we got off at noon on Saturday, and then just did chores on Sunday. And back in those days, we lived in the barns and we eat in boarding houses. There's a lot of I don't know if they still do that or not, but there's a lot of boarding houses. In fact, the one that we eat at was where Eskimo Joe's is at. It's Four Hands Boarding House right there, And we were the ladies that we, they pretty well took care of us. Sometimes we'd be late or, because we couldn't get there in time. And they'd usually stay around so we could get our suppers or, but it wasn't that bad. There was a whole bunch of us that did that, and we just kind of had a little fraternity of our own, because of the number of us that did that, But it was a way, going to school, I guess if it hadn't done that, might not have been able to go. We made, if I remember right, they paid us $40 a month, and then got to live in those facilities. And the boarding houses let us eat for $40 a month. And when I was a senior, we got a $5 raise, and the boarding houses went up $5. So, but you think that sounds pretty cheap, but during consider the time before so much, everything's going up. It wasn't probably all that bad. And I remember also that the tuition at OSU at that time was $9 credit hour. And considered now and what's happened, that's changed a great deal too, but we had a good time. My college era was very enjoyable, I'll put it that way. We had made a lot of real good friends, and it was just something that I didn't have any problem at all. The biggest problem, I think, we didn't get out of school, into the first semester till after Christmas. Usually we start the school in September, and we usually got off 2 weeks, for Christmas. And the ones that stayed there the first week got to go home after they did chores on Christmas morning. And then ones that got to go home, then they came back and had to do chores on Christmas night. That's the way they divided it, And that used to be a pretty lonely period of time. I think everybody wants to be home on Christmas, and you get up early Christmas morning and you're, that's a pretty lonely period, not hardly anybody left on campus,
Mm-hmm.
But that was one thing I do remember, that you might have liked to change if you could, but somebody had to stay and take care of, our jobs, and that was okay,
Well, describe your sleeping arrangement in the barn.
Well, the one there at the sheep barn, we had a 3-high bunk bed. There was 3 of us that worked there, and that's about it. And then we had just a restroom facility with a shower, and that was about the extent of it. And it's just as you come in the doors, the big doors of the barn, right there on the right was where you went into the little room.
Mm-hmm.
And then my senior year, I stayed in the experimental swine barn. I worked for a professor that was in charge of animal breeding back in those days, Dr. Whiteley. And some of the older people would remember him because he was he went on to be pretty much the head of the experiment stations and things like that. And that was up on the hill there from close to the old dairy barn. Well, anyhow, I stayed up there by myself, and we had a little cooking facility there, and again, one little room with a bunk bed in it, and but it was adequate, for what we used it for. And then the old hog barn is still there on 6th Street. It's still there,
Mm-hmm.
and I spent a lot of time there. That was a tough deal, I tell you what. A lot of people. That would come and just couldn't hardly imagine that we would live in a facility like that. My family the same way. But again, you kind of do what you got to do, I guess. And we really didn't have a lot of help from home. Not that we thought we needed to, but we preferred to make it on our own, and we pretty much made it on our own. But it was all right. We didn't complain, we were just old country boys, and didn't really have to have I had a lot of real good fraternity friends. Another thing that was very fortunate, I think, everybody that was involved in the agricultural era for the last 40 years knew Dr. Bob Todashek.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on Dr. Todashek's judging team in 1959. And that was really, if you were on the judging team at OSU, that was pretty good, because at that time, the animal husbandry department was probably one of the most highly recognized division of agriculture in the United States. Probably Oklahoma State University and Iowa State University and the University of Illinois, University of Nebraska, those were the really, really top. And I think at that time, probably because of the professors that we had there, OSU was probably the top animal husbandry department in the United States at that time. And we had a record of just winning most all those big shows that we went to. And at that time, we went to International, which was in Chicago, Illinois. And we won Chicago twice while I was in school there, which was, and then they had the big fire there and it burnt the old stockyards down, and when that happened, they moved it to Louisville, Kentucky, and that's where it's at now, the International. But that's basically, some of the things. And also, we had a Block and Bridle Club, which was, the club of the Animal Husbandry Boys. And we had a little rodeo every year, which is always a highlight. And we had what we called a Little International, which was a showing and fitting contest. And I don't know why they still do that or not, but it was always it was something that students, could do and enjoyed doing as far as this concerned. But it was a good era. Dr. Oliver Wilhelm was the president, and he was a animal breeding specialist, when he was a professor there. Dr. Al Darlow was the Dean of Agriculture, and probably one of the more highly recognized animal science guy, in the United States at that time. I might also mention when I worked at the sheep barn, the shepherd was Alec McKenzie, and he was probably recognized pretty much worldwide. He'd come to this country from Scotland. He was on a cattle boat that went to Canada. Dr. Darlow was judging the show in Canada and found him and brought him to Oklahoma State University, and he stayed there till he retired for about 35 years, and showed lots of sheep for all the big shows, and judged pretty well all the big sheep shows. And that was another, I think, something that to be able to say you worked for Alec McKenzie, because he was so highly recognized, in the sheep industry. And so, those are eras and things that happened back in those days that these youngsters don't have the opportunity, today. And I think another thing that I might mention that if you've ever been in the Animal Science Building, the bronze bull still sits there, And while I was in school there, the engineers stole the bronze bull and castrated him. and that almost brought a stop to the college. That thing, the way they become of this thing, a great big bronze statue. You may have seen it. If you haven't, you ought to go look at it. But anyhow, it's a huge bronze statue of this old bull, And only you had to win the international judging contest 3 times in a row, or 3 times and it is one thing that I guess is probably most well recognized when people come, because of the history of it, But anyhow, that's something that the engineers and the Aggies was always, pretty much at odds all the time, I'm telling you, and I guess maybe still are, But anyhow, that's another thing that was kind of, fun. I got out of school there in 1960, and my BS degree. And because we'd worked at the barns, I'd pretty well been assured a job for the department when I got out of school. And at that time, all of the research projects were at Fort Reno, down at El Reno. And that was I had been promised a job at Fort Reno. Well, at the time, it hadn't materialized at that time, And so, like everybody else, I got out of school that spring and went back home. Well, my brother and my father were in the dairy business, so I was pretty handy around there hauling hay and doing all those things, And I thought, well, I've spent an awful lot of time going to college. I thought it'd sure be better than this when I got out of college, Well, anyhow, I had a real good friend that was buying hogs from Iron River Meat Packers in Ark City, Kansas, and that was back when these huge hog operations were coming into being. And this guy had a 1,200 sow operation at Dodge City, Kansas. And was just about to go under. They didn't know anything about the hog business, you know. So this guy called me and he said, have you found a job yet, you know? And I said, well, no, I haven't yet. And he said, well, I have a friend that's got a huge swine operation out at Dodge City that really needs somebody to come up there and help him. And we went up there and looked at it, and I thought, well, you know, this would at least be a good experience, if nothing else, until maybe something else materializes. So I went up there, and lo and behold, about 2 months after I went up there, they called me at Fort Reno, and that's when I think in that 2 month period, I went through a sandstorm in Dodge City, Kansas, and I thought, well, there's got to be someplace better to live than this right here. So when I had the opportunity to go back to Oklahoma and Fort Reno, I did, you know. And I started my era working for the state of Oklahoma in the fall of 1960 after I graduated in the spring. And I worked out at Fort Reno there for 2 years, and then I changed over to Extension Service. And we moved to well, that was before I got married, and my friend at Fort Reno wound up being my future brother-in-law. And so my wife, they were from Fort Worth, by Fort Worth. And,
Well, how'd you meet your wife?
well, she would come up there, and like I say, her brother worked there at Fort Reno, you know, with me. And that's how we met, you know. And anyhow, he moved on up. He got to come back to OSU to finish up his degree, and so I went there and took his job there at Fort Reno. And it was kind of a job where more or less in training type position, you know. And then I went to Fort Reno. I went to an extension service, and I went to Ardmore, Oklahoma. I spent 6 months in training, and then I went to a job over at Durant, which is in the southeastern part of the state. Went to work for the Extension Service, and I was there 3 years, and then I had the opportunity to come to Cameron University, or at that time, Cameron State Ag College at Lawton. It was still a junior college, and that was in actually the fall of 1965. And what was so different back in those times is, you know, we didn't have any contract, we didn't have any affirmative action, they would tell us in April if we were going to have a job next year, and that was about the best they could do, you know. We didn't know. We came to Lawton, and those of you, if you think back, that was the beginning of this Vietnam War, and, you know, in the early 60s there. And by 1965, 66, and 67 is when that Vietnam War was at the height, you know. And that was really an era at Cameron, you know. When I came over here and went to teaching, that thing, you know, a lot of the young people, you know, if they could get in school and stay in school, they could get an educational deferment, you know. And we had to, as teachers, at the end of every 6 weeks, turn, you know, the grades into the registrar. And anybody that was on the DIT and F list, that was when we still had, you know, the draft. And those names went to the draft board. And when they were, educational deferment was 4A. And when you lost that, you went to 1A. And 1A was a trip right straight to Vietnam, you know. And lots of times, you know, I'd get to school on Monday morning, and there'd be mothers of those boys that had been notified that they were, you know, and they would be there trying to figure out some way to keep them in school. And, you know, it was really a touchy thing, you know. It was something you had to treat everybody fairly and have to treat everybody the same, because I don't know how you could live with yourself if you didn't do that, and somebody went to the war and didn't come back, and somebody that stayed at home that should have went. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So that was an era that was really different, you know, that we taught in. And
what did you teach at Cameron?
I taught in the animal husbandry department. I taught introductory animal science. Everything was animal science then, because it changed, you know. But I taught the introductory courses, and then when Cameron was still junior college at that time. And then it went to a 4-year school in '68, and they graduated their first class, 4-year class, baccalaureate class in 1970. In the ag department, it didn't change until '71, and then where our classes were graduates, after that. But I had all of the animal science classes. Then we had, and I might also point out, we didn't have any sabbatical at all, back in those days. Well, in the '70s, Oklahoma hit another oil boom, really, and they got to getting quite a bit of money for education. So they give us that hadn't had a chance to finish our degrees, we could go take sabbatical leave. And we could go 6 months at full pay, or 12, or full 2 semesters at half pay. Well, like everybody else, I had a wife and children at home and trying to maintain, there. And then again, had to have a place to live at OSU, at Stillwater. So that was one reason, that I didn't have any problem living in the barns, because I couldn't afford, other things. But anyhow, we made it through. That was kind of tough, probably tougher on them than it was me, because they had to stay at home and make it through the summer, and keep the home fires kind of going. And so anyhow, we did that.
You went back to earn your master's?
Yeah, I got my master's. And then after that, I got another sabbatical to go back and work on my doctor's. And I finally, I had gone to school, you could just about imagine, every summer, and I finally got a break in it, and that was the only regret, I guess, probably I have of myself, and I think the only disappointment they have of me that I didn't finish. I liked about 9 hours and my dissertation, finishing my doctor's, and I really wished I had. That was one thing I really wished I had done. If I had it to do over, I'm sure I would have. But anyhow, that was a period that we started out, and we didn't know how long we would be at Cameron. I always thought that we'd stay in a place until something maybe better we would like more so than and it just never really happened. I got to coach a judging team here at Cameron, which I really liked, especially being on the judging team there at OSU. And we had quite a bit of success. We won Houston a couple of years, and we competed with all of the other junior colleges in the state, and not only just in the state, but in the southwest part of the United States, And so we got to do that. That was, a fun time during the early stages that I was at Cameron. Then when I went back to work on my doctor's, they hired another animal scientist, and he was the shepherd at University of Illinois, and he came, and that's when we went into 4-year, became a graduate, degree program. And anyhow, there was 2 of us, and we covered all of the animal science courses together, then, which was quite a few more when we had to start teaching upper division classes, So we did that, and all the time I was there, we went through about, about 4 presidents, at Cameron during that period. And so I had a real good era at Cameron,
You were there a long time.
Yeah, I was there 35 years.
What year did you retire?
I retired in the year 2000.
Okay.
I started in 1965 and retired in the year 2000. And I was 62 years old this spring, and I always said that when I got, almost with this health insurance, I just kept going up, and I would have liked to retire maybe sooner because I was farming all the time that, I was teaching school too. And I just couldn't really make it, retiring earlier because of insurance. So when we finally got where we could get, of course, our, teacher's retirement, and also our Social Security, then we could afford to get out, you know. So that's how come me to retire, I guess, at that age, you know.
Were you farming this whole period you were at Cameron?
Pretty much so. I came over there in '65. I wasn't farming for myself at the early stages, and then in '76 is when we bought one of the first farms we had, and that's when we went to farming pretty much full time. I mean, you know, still school teaching was the one thing that allowed me to farm. I'll be real honest with you, you know. But that's when we really started, you know, on our own, and was really fortunate, you know. This land is just absolutely skyrocketed, you know, and especially here, if you look across the road here, you know. And one thing, we're close enough to Lawton. You know, Lawton is the, you know, I guess about the fourth largest city in the state, you know, and the area about 25-mile radius of Lawton is pretty much, you know, close enough in that we've seen that affect land values. You know, people want to get out and this type of thing. But anyhow, we bought our first place, and back in those days, it you know, the Federal Land Bank would loan you 65% of the loan. You know. Well, you know, I was very much like a lot of other people. I had a wife, and at that time, Jolene, when she was a little youngster, she was sick quite a bit, you know. And so I told everybody, you know, well, you know, time you pay your bills, and especially your doctor bills and medical bills and all that kind of thing. We didn't have, pretty hard to come up with that 35%, you know. And we got to farming school land. You know, in Oklahoma, there's lots of school land, and how this come about was when Oklahoma became a state, there was a certain amount of land in western Oklahoma that was given to the school land department, and the revenue off of that was used to operate these small schools. And there's still quite a lot of school land, you know, and that's the way we got started, was farming school land, you know, was leases. And anyhow, we did that, and we finally got together enough money to pay that 35%. We bought our first place, you know. And fortunate enough, we got some equity in that, and was able to use the equity in that to buy another farm. And I guess, you know, just like any other farmer or anybody that owns land, you can't ever get too much, you know. And but anyhow, we wound up. We've gotten 4 quarters of deeded land, and we farm. Before I went to cutting back, we was farming about 1,700 acres, and part of that was a lot of it was lease land, you know.
What were you farming?
Mostly wheat and cattle.
Mm-hmm.
The cattle end of it has been the main thing. But we farm. This is big wheat country in our area here. You know, I say big wheat country. It's one of the major crops, wheat and cotton. And I've never been a cotton farmer much, you know, because it's a row crop, you know. And cattle and wheat is just two things that go together. We grow wheat more for forage, I think, than we do for the grain, you know, because wheat pasture and cattle is just the best combination in the farming business that I think you can get into. You know? And so that's why we do that mostly. But anyhow, we got to farming, and then we've been very active in our community, I think. I like we have a little volunteer fire department that we're active in, you know, and I was on the board of the Farm Service Agency for about 12 years, which is the board that manages government money, you know, for all the farm operations. And I was a board member on our Federal Credit Union, or used to be the Lawton Teachers Credit Union, for about 17, 18 years. But I thought, you know, it was something, I didn't do much of that as long as I was teaching school, because I didn't think I had, you know, enough time to, but after we quit teaching, or retired, and we become pretty active. Wife, she's very active in her church, and they always, one of the big things they do is provide a meal for all of the, for anybody at, when they're passed for a funeral. And she's done that for, gosh, I don't know how long. And our kids, I guess, are just like everybody else, or, I guess we always thought was the pride of her families. And so Pam, her oldest daughter, she got out and she went up at OSU, 1 year or 2 years? 1 year. And I think kind of realized that, you could go other places, especially after she got her grades at first. But anyhow, she came back and started out at Cameron, and she got her degree there at Cameron in vocational home economics at that time. And she, the first job she took was back in that time when OSU had this what they call an energy program. And what they did was to teach or train these lower income families how to, fix their homes where it would be more energy efficient and things like that. And she went to work, and it was really a short, supposed to be, a kind of short-term job, wasn't nothing, And before she completed that 6 months, she got to go to work for the extension in Cotton County, is a little county next to us here. And very small county, and that job come open, and she got to go down there. And she's been down there, right there at Walters, and been the county extension director for, I think, about 34 years now, and that's a long time in one spot, And then Jolene come along, and she decided she wanted to be a nurse, And so at that time, Cameron had a nursing program. It wasn't, and it's connected with OU now, but at that time it's strictly, with at Cameron. And so she got her RN there at Cameron, and she got out and went to work. She and her husband got married there in 84, and she went to work for the Pauls Valley Hospital. They live over at Pauls Valley. And her husband worked for the post office and farmed. And then she went to work for the county. She was a county nurse at that time. And worked there for how many years?
25.
Yeah, but I mean, before you went, anyhow, presently she's a 4-county nursing director, more in the administrative part of it. So had good jobs, and stayed with them, and been very. And our youngest grandson, he went to school at OSU and just recently gotten out, and he farms with his dad. And our other 2 grandsons, one of them is the extension director in Johnson County at Tishomingo, and the other one is with Soil Conservation in Oklahoma City. And so all of, they went to school and got their degree here at Cameron. The youngest one went to school at OSU though. And so, my son-in-laws both are graduates of Cameron. So, Cameron, and then Roberta worked for the post office on campus for 22 years. So, Cameron's been good to us, so we have to be somewhat aligned to Cameron too. But we got all my education has been through OSU, and so we've been pretty much pro-ed. Our, going to school in our family, really, whether you went or not, wasn't an alternative, until they got out of college. And we know that that's paid, big dividends for all of them, And we recently got a 3-year-old grandson, great-grandson, and fixing to have a great-granddaughter, the first one female in our family in 50 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so you can imagine getting a little granddaughter, you don't think she's going to be spoiled. So anyhow, but we've had a good family life, I will put it that way, all of us, enjoy getting together. In fact, Sundays, tomorrow's Roberta's birthday, but going to have the big deal Sunday, and they're all coming here Sunday, so having her big birthday Sunday.
Well, there are a few things I kind of want to ask you some follow-up questions on.
Yeah.
Did you do any judging while you were at Murray?
Yes, and I had an opportunity to judge there 2 years, and still got the medals in there. I was high individual at Houston when I was a freshman, and Houston was a big time, you know. And then the next year we judged at Fort Worth, and I was high individual in swine judging and high individual in oral reasons overall when I was the second year. But we had a real good coach when I was at Murray, you know, and I think that was part of the reason. As much time we spent in that in a junior college when I got to OSU, that I had an opportunity to make the judging team up there, you know. So
Which was tough then.
yeah, real tough, real tough. I tell you, Dr. Tadashek is also another one of those guys that's pretty much world renowned. If you had, had an opportunity to, know him, and he was an Oklahoma boy, and OSU graduate, and we had another thing that I think that was something worth mentioning at that time. We got absolutely no help. Everything was volunteer on our part. When we would go to meets or to contests, we paid our own way, we have spent up there almost every weekend when we could get off from the college. They were pretty good since we were working for the university, in the animal science or animal husbandry, to let us off if we were making a judging team, and because that was part of the same school, and we did a lot of traveling just in the practice, and again, you had to want to do it pretty bad, just pay your own way, and but that was okay because it was worth it, and yeah, you can say you were on the OSU judging team. That's pretty good, something to put on a resume too,
But you took 2 trips to international. How did you get there?
We went in. I remember we had a 56 Ford station wagon, and that was, this was in 57, 58. I was on the judging team at 59, and we drove up there, and I never will forget one time we were up there and coming home. While we were up there, it became a bad storm. We drove on the ice almost all the way, and that was I tell you another thing that might be interesting. When I worked at the sheep barn, Alec McCain, they did a lot of, back then, the university showed at these big Chicago and Kansas City and Houston. And back then, there wasn't a railroad that went, I don't think still there's a railroad runs through Stillwater, or if there was, but anyhow, what I remember, they would set us a boxcar over at Perry, where Perry is. And we'd go over there and fix pins and deal, and he and another one of the students would ride that boxcar all the way from Perry, Oklahoma to Chicago, Illinois, and take care of the animals. And that was sheep in that particular case. They had a whole boxcar load of sheep, And anyhow, he used to tell us that sometimes, they'd get kicked off on a spur or something, in a railroad, and they didn't know when they knew when they were going to be there, but they didn't know if they get kicked off when they were going to start again. And you can imagine cold weather. This is November, and you're going north, and November is. I never did make that trip. I did go to Kansas City one year, but we went by car and truck up there. We didn't go in the boxcar. But it's kind of, you tell these youngsters today, it's pretty hard for them to imagine, And back those days, it was just something that. Again, that was really kind of an honor to get to do that,
You mentioned the Brock and Bridle Club. Did you do much rodeoing?
No, I wasn't. Another thing that I might point out, I was kind of unfortunate. I was crippled. I got crippled when I was about 7 years old, and I was crippled almost all my junior high or my school period. Back in those days, I wore a build-up shoe and a brace for about 8 or 9 years. And when I got out, finally I went to McBride Hospital, Oklahoma City. But anyhow, to make a long story short, it pretty well took me out of being able to, be in, any type of athletic.
Was it polio? Or?
No, it was during the polio period. But the doctor told my mother and dad that we had a brother that was that way. Mm-hmm. And that we had Perthes disease, and this was it caused your bones to get soft, and my right hip just crumbled off, And their theory was that by not walking on it, and that's the reason they're putting weight on it, and that's the way they could prevent putting weight on it by using this brace and this built-up shoe, and that it would grow back because I was young. And it never really did. In fact, when they finally gave up, they told me that I'd eventually have trouble, as I got older. And sure enough, it finally just got really, really bad, and I never will forget, they kept trying to get me to go. That was when they first started putting these prostheses in, And I had a brother that he had his fixed, there at McBride. And it just got to really cause me a lot of trouble and lots of pain. And I remember we were getting ready to sow wheat, and I'd been farming and putting a lot of hours in. And I came in one day for lunch and just moaning, and and I said something about I believe I'll just go up to Oklahoma City and have my hip fixed. And my wife heard me say that, and I come in about a week, and she said that I have you an appointment with, I can't remember that doctor's name. Rice, Dr. Rice at the McBride in Oklahoma City. And I didn't refuse it. You probably, and again, after I did that, that was probably, you look back over things that you do during your life that changed your life, and that was probably one of the greatest things I ever done. Mm-hmm. Because I'd been crippled, so long, and when I had that hip fixed, it was just, and I can still say I still don't have any problem, and that's been a long time. Oh, I had my first in 1979.
See that it could really hurt you with farm chores and really take a toll.
That was one of the things that, they were, I was wanting, I was trying to get on rehab, when I was in school, and rehab didn't want to give me any assistance because I was in agriculture, because they didn't think because of my condition that I would ever be able to, make a go of it in the farming business, but I did, and that wasn't, what I'm saying, it was, but it was just it was a miracle when I had that done, so I will credit that as being one of the major things, that helped me as far as being able to improve my health. Mm-hmm. And then I had to have a bypass surgery in about 93, and I've had good luck ever since. So I had a few health problems, but for the most part, still able to get out and do all my farming and take care of my cattle, and that's just been a big part of my life, I said several times, I got out of high school, and if I could have had the resources to made a living, in the farming business at that time, I probably wouldn't have ever went to college. And that was just out of the picture, And finally wound up working for the state of Oklahoma 41 years, and finally after that I got started farming. But I had 41 years in higher education with OSU in Cameron, and then I had enough sick leave. They give me 1 year for my sick leave, and I wound up 41 years. So turned out to be a good retirement, and we had Dr. Bennett was our division chairman, and he and I together wrote a grant and got a grant to do a lot of embryo transfer. My degree, all my advanced degree was in reproductive physiology. And that was when they really started doing much of this. They've been doing a lot of artificial breeding, but this embryo transfer was, something relatively new. I mean, it ain't right now, but when it was coming in. And I think we got a $160,000 grant there at Cameron, and this gave us a chance to go out and buy some really, really high quality females that we would have to, recover the embryos out of. And we got to do that, for students, and we got to doing it right there on campus, which was really something big for a small school, And if we hadn't got that, which also had helped me, it gave me, it gave me a 12-month employment, my last few years, which really helped my retirement, So, and not only that was good for Cameron, it was good for the students, and it was certainly good for those of us that were involved in it, And and we still got a lot of really good cows, that became those really high producing, high quality females through that program, So that was another thing that was kind of fun,
Taking you back to your cooperative extension days down in Durant, what was your role? Were you a county agent?
I was assistant county agent, charged mostly 4-H.
Okay.
Yeah. Another thing that we got involved in, all of us in the part there, there's a lot of, Bryan County is a county below Lake Texoma. It's on Red River, and Lake Texoma is when the Washita River and Red River come together and they make Lake Texoma. Well, all the water in Red River is got too much salt in it to irrigate out of. But when the Washita and Red River come into the lake, then when they turn it out, the salinity goes down where it's irrigable. And so they went to, before that, those guys farming down there in that valley was mostly, they just had, dirt irrigation ditches. And after they got some federal money, they went to building concrete lined irrigation ditches. And we were there, and the extension was really, really involved in that. We had a ag engineer that, that worked in extension, and through our office and this ag engineer, we did big part of the engineering work, for those things. And that was one thing that we did, that I did for the farmers. But mostly my job was pretty much in the 4-H end of it, Of course, I was the youngest person in the office too, So
it made sense.
Yeah. So that was a big thing. I did probably, or my main part of responsibility when I was in extension, But I liked the extension. I think one thing probably that the reason I got out of it. The old gentleman that was the director of extension had been there for many, many years. And he retired, and we had just, hadn't been there very long. And we were at a county agents convention in Stillwater, and he was a guy who came out of Missouri. And he told us there that day that he expected all of the agents in Oklahoma to become mobile. That we'd be in a county about three years, and we'd have to move. And I didn't like the idea of, really, how can you ever get started and accumulate or do much if you're going to move every 3 years? And that's when we found out. In fact, we were coming home, and she and I both agreed that that wasn't something that we were going to, I thought, if you we're going to do that, you could join the military and they'll help you, So we wound up having an opportunity to come over here at Cameron, and we knew that as long as we taught school at Cameron that we'd be here, and we've been here ever since, But I tell you another era that I didn't mention there a while ago that was really, really became an important period was the end of that Vietnam War when all these veterans come home. And of course, Lawton being a military town with Fort Sill, those guys had quite a lot of, GI benefits. And they had 10 years to use them, and we went to having night students. We had night classes 4 nights a week, you know, those soldiers, and or retired soldiers,
Sure.
you know. And that was a period, it was a period of non-conventional students, you know. These guys, most all of them were older than I was, you know. In fact, I had a lot of students when I came to Cameron, you know, was older than I was. I was 26 years old when I started teaching out here. We had a lot of students, you know, and that was, but when we went to having all these veterans, you know, coming in, and those guys, my opinion, I felt like, you know, those guys pretty much paid their way. You know, hey, they spent a number of years during that war period that nobody much approved of to begin with, and you know, and so if they wanted to go to college, I thought that was great, and anything we could do, and this was kind of we felt in our department that we could do to encourage them to go to school and you know, and come to Cameron, and that's kind of the way we approached those older students, and we got to make a lot of really, really good friends that later on, you know, was really supporters of our department, you know. And another thing that I think was kind of unique, but I thought it was something that we as teachers should do, you know, being able to remember, you know, faces and names and things like that. And I got where I worked at it some too, you know. If you want to, you know, you can do things to help you remember. And those guys, I think, when they were in the military, were just numbers, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I'd have those, we'd have them. They were 8-week classes, you know, 2 8-week classes in a semester. And by the time that our class was over, I knew most of them, you know. I'd call them by name, most of them. And the one thing I remember more than anything, you know, one day I run on to one of those students up here in the grocery store, and this was several years after, you know. And I walked up to him and called him by his first name, and I hadn't seen him. And he just grabbed me and just gave me a big old hug, and he said, Mr. Kennedy, how in the world could you ever remember my name? He said, there was many of us and only you, and I cannot imagine anybody could remember our name, you know. And I think it was because, you know, in the military, you know, and they thought that was just something great, you know.
What was your trick?
Well, you know, you try to associate, you know, them with somebody else that you know with a name like that. That was, you know, that was one thing. And then we did a lot of things that really associated with them that really wasn't particularly in class. You know, we always, during the stock show, Lawton and Comanche County has a great big stock show every year, you know, livestock show. And we'd have 400 or 500 hogs in the stock show, and we'd have to weigh every one of them, you know, before the stock show. Well, that was a big, big deal for those guys. We'd take them down there at night class, and we'd take them down there and weigh those pigs, you know, and they never had an opportunity to do something like that, you know, personally, you know. And we just did a lot of things that, you know, associated yourself with them, and that was one thing. And I didn't remember, but, you know, it helps you, you know, and I think they appreciated something like that.
Does this part of Comanche County that we're in have a certain name? I know we're kind of outside of Lawton, but
this right here, we're in a Huron community.
Okay.
Huron, right over here, about 4 miles, used to be a little town. It had a cotton gin, and right now they still have a grain buying elevator, and there's a Methodist church over there. That's about all that's left. But one time they had, it was kind of a pretty good size, not big, but they had several businesses, you know. But it's just like a lot of the others over the years, you know, they just finally, people went to going away. And the biggest thing there right now is the grain elevator. Mm-hmm. We grow a lot of wheat in this area, thousands, quite a number of acres, you know. Of course, wheat is big in western Oklahoma, mm-hmm. but in this area right through here is pretty good wheat country. You know, I mean, as far as wheat production, we make pretty good wheat crops here. And the biggest problem, of course, is the fact that like a lot of other crops, the wheat market has sure been sporadic in the last few years, and drought problems. But really, and the big thing that helps wheat is, of course, like I said a while ago, the use of it in cattle production. We've come through a period just recently that is an all-time record as far as cattle prices. Cattle prices have never been what they've been last. Of course, they've gone down some too, but went through a period there, where a market calf that we'd send to Oklahoma City, the market up there off of wheat pasture, bring $2,000. Now you think about that. Stock or truckload of cattle bring $115,000, $20,000. That's lots of money. We've never seen anybody in the cattle business, and they're very profitable too. So that's why the cattle business has been, big time. Not only just the big thing is also we still have what we call cow-calf operations, and we have mama cows and raised calves and weaned calves and put them on wheat pasture. And that's pretty much the way we operate, as far as our cattle business is concerned.
And you're also farming land in Cotton County as well.
Well, now I don't have any in Cotton County, but Cotton County is just 3 miles down.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I used to have one place in Cotton County, but I don't have it anymore. It was just got to the point where, you just go to running your machinery, you get so much money tied up in, farm machinery, and you go to running up and down the roads, but I forgot about that. That was in Cotton County.
Have you seen much no-till in this area?
We're starting to see, I have a neighbor that's got a place just across the road from me over here is starting no-till. I think no-till is probably going to be, I think it's going to find a place. The big problem that's starting out in no-till is the fact that you have to change your equipment. You go spend $75,000, $80,000, $100,000 for a new drill, you got to be committed. Probably another $60,000 for a spray rig. Where you really get to putting the dollar to it and the pencil to it. You can plow if you want to set on the tractor long enough for about the same price that you can buy glyphosate, Roundup. And you got to spray to control all your weeds. By the time you spray for 3 or 4 times, that gets to be kind of expensive too. But we're seeing it really get a hold. There's probably more of it down the Kinders down in Cotton County, were really kind of some of the forerunners, and they got into it, and they're seeing another thing that is really promoted no-till is these varieties of cotton. We don't have any varieties of wheat, but we've got varieties of cotton, that you can plant and spray and go back with the cotton picker. Monsanto, of course, you got to buy, that seed is about $100 an acre to plant it, and then you've got to use Roundup. You can't use a generic form of Roundup to spray it, so it has just absolutely revolutionized the cotton business. The cotton business is about gone in this country till they control the boll weevil, and then they come along with these, genetically altered seed, and it's the only way to go. I mean, nobody questions that at all. I never will forget. I had a neighbor over here that come by one day, and he was there in the road, and so I asked him, I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I'm planting cotton." And I said, "Whereabouts?" And he said, "Well, he's planting cotton right there." And I said, "You mean you're planting cotton out there in that?" I thought he was crazy. And he said, "Yeah." And so I thought, well, whatever, we have a lot of farmers that, farm for insurance and, anyhow, government payments and insurance. And so I said, okay. And, I came back down there in about 2 weeks, and that was as pretty a cotton field as you ever saw. It just, rows that he'd plowed it, after he'd come up. And rows of cotton, there wasn't nothing but a row of cotton, and everything else just clean as it could be. You know, because the chemical killed all the weeds, and then naturally killed the weed again. It was just a beautiful crop, and that's what you can do, you know, with these genetically altered seeds. But you know, we're getting a lot of resistance to Roundup. You know, Roundup. I'm sure you probably know what Roundup. You know, that variety is Monsanto product, and we're getting a lot of resistance to glyphosate, and so another problem that we run into, you know, glyphosate won't kill cotton, you know, and if you've got a lot of, you know, volunteer cotton where you know, leave the seed on the ground, you got a problem there, because how are you going to get rid of that, you know, volunteer cotton, you know? So, you know, a lot of people didn't realize that. But anyhow, yeah, we've seen, we have to admit and have to pat ourselves on the back some. We've come a long ways, you know, in this technology as far as cotton production is concerned, you know, and I tell you what, there's lots of good farmers in this country. In fact, I had one of my former students that went to work for Syngenta, which is one of the I think it's the 7th largest chemical company, that developed a product called Axle, and it's to control ryegrass and wheat. And he was one of the R&D research and development guy for that. And he lived at Lubbock, and out in the high plains, you know, they grow mostly cotton, they don't grow much wheat. And they were needing some area back here, you know, to do some research with wheat, you know. And he said, well, I've got a former professor that's farms wheat out there. He said, I bet he would do that for us. And of course, I really, you know, I'm glad and just appreciate he offered to let me use some of my property. And he came and they put a lot of research plots on, and he put some of them right out here. This road right down here is another thing. It doesn't mean anything, but it's what we call a baseline. And if you live in Oklahoma, all of the plots and all of the survey in Oklahoma was off of this road right here in the Meridian Line. Meridian Line, if you come east to west Stillwater, before you go, when you go back, you know what the Meridian Line?
I do.
Okay. Meridian Line runs north and south. The baseline right there runs east and west. And those two come together over here south of Pauls Valley. And everything south of that road right there is south. When you take the, you know, everything north of it, this farm right here is one north. Anything on the other side of that road is one south, in legal description, you know.
Yep.
And that's significant. A lot of people don't realize that. You know, the Meridian Line, that's how Oklahoma was surveyed, you know. And, but anyhow, you know, we've done a lot of work, you know, in helping. We have to give those chemical companies credit, you know. And I tell you another thing that is not set very good with lots of people, but you've got to admit, and OSU is one of them, is, you know, we're developing these high-producing lines of wheat, you know. I mean, OSU has really done a lot of good work in wheat breeding, you know. Well, boy, that costs a lot of money. I mean, you know, and up until that, the seed companies are about the only ones that were willing to spend that, you know. And, you know, they can determine those varieties, you know, with DNA. And, boy, I'm telling you what, they've got this thing worked out. If you, you know, use these, you know, improved varieties of wheat that's been developed, and don't pay the premium on them, boy, you can really, in fact, I had one neighbor down here, and we've always, you know, if I grow a wheat crop out here, I can replant it myself, but I can't sell it to you. And if you get caught in me selling it to you, I had a neighbor down here done that, and he's an older farmer, and they fined him $50,000.
Wow.
So he got their attention when that deal. It come down to a court case. And we always thought, you know, since we pay taxes, and OSU is a tax-supported institution, that if they produce a variety up there, then we should have privy to that. Well, we don't do that anymore. You know, OSU has produced a lot of really, really, you know, good wheat varieties. Well, Texas A&M has done the same thing. See, everything that Texas A&M's produced is TAM, like TAM 101 or, you know, and OSU has produced a lot of varieties that most of them have got, you know, Indian names or But still, they're getting a lot of revenue. And in fact, I saw a deal the other day. I got a publication where I think it's approaching $1 million that OSU has gotten off of royalties off of wheat. You know, which is good. I'm for it. You know, I realize what it costs to produce those things. You know, and it takes a long time.
Sure.
And so, but we as farmers have gained, and benefited from that. So these people, and some of them are still planting these old varieties, just not willing to, to pay. And I have a neighbor up the road here that sells a lot of seed wheat, but he's still selling those old varieties, because they're not willing to, pay for these certified seed, start out. So, which is all right if you want to use them, but there's so much difference in production, of these improved varieties compared to the old ones that I can't hardly imagine, still, doing that. That's, that's their call, as far as that's concerned. But Oklahoma's been very, very supportive, particularly Oklahoma State, in, their research and not only just in crop production, but animal production too, very, very supportive, and another thing that's helped a whole lot, of course, is this beef checkoff, cost us $1 every time we sell an animal and a lot of that goes, for research. So I'm kind of pro when it comes to anything that will, in the long run will help us, help us stay in business, really, But
well, these days, how do you stay connected to OSU?
Well, I'm, of course, a member of the Animal Science Alumni, which we have a meeting up there every year, in the spring. And I haven't gone to one in several years, but we get publications. And then I tell you another thing we do. OSU is connected with Noble Foundation. I don't know if you're familiar with Noble Foundation over at Ardmore. And they work together, and we get a publication from from them. And then usually we get a newsletter from the extension every month, and we have a number of our graduates from Cameron that work for OSU Extension, In fact, the new livestock specialist that lives in Duncan is one of my former students, So we have the extension does a pretty good job, of getting information, and that's really their job, not just in having an office, but the extension basically is extending Oklahoma State University out to where it can be useful, and that's one way, But we get several publications, especially in new research projects, as far as that's concerned. But I think OSU does a good job getting information out, and most of it really is through. I think probably a lot of it's through the extension. Probably that's where the main source of getting their information out, and so that's good. That's a plus as far as that's concerned.
You have a good relationship with your county agent?
Yeah, real good, real good. I have a number. We've had a number of county agents that. Here's the thing that a lot of people don't realize nowadays. When I was a youngster growing up, the county agent was looked on as one of the persons that's got all the knowledge, And they did have a lot of knowledge because they had a source of it, What a lot of people don't know now, a lot of these guys out here farming are about as knowledgeable as the county agent. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
And they've had to be, just like we're talking about these chemicals, what to use. Here's another real source of information is we've got to give them credit is these commercial companies, every one of them. I have a young man who lives over here, works for Helena Chemical, and his job basically is to scout cotton and wheat. And it's a service that costs very little, I can plant wheat crop. I don't ever worry about bugs. When I need to spray, he lets me know when I need to spray. Or we'll even order the guy to come and spray it. That's where we're at. And that's a source from private the private source, you know. And those guys making their living at that, you know, and boy, don't you think those guys don't know what they're doing, you know. So that's another source. I tell you, we in the farming industry today probably are about as knowledgeable in all of these new things that's come down the pike, you know, as anybody, you know. And not only it's made our business more profitable, you know, and it's allowed us to stay in business, you know. And sure, you know, we never would have thought we'd have paid $100 an acre for cottonseed, you know. When you could pay it, you know, $15 an acre, or you know, we never would have thought we'd be paying $25 an acre for seed wheat, you know.
Oh yeah.
But you know, somebody's got. When you look at what it costs to produce, you know, those things, somebody's got to, you know, as the old saying, there's no free lunch, you know. That's about what it amounts to. You know, somebody, if we have it, somebody's got to pay the price. And I think if it wasn't the fact that, you know, by golly, it would pay, we wouldn't use it. Or if it hadn't been paying, we would quit using it, you know. Same thing we can say in the animal business, you know. I think right up here at Cameron, where we got into this embryo transfer, you know. You know, of course, we can take, you know, our side of it, we can collect semen from basically one collection, we may go breed. The dairy people proved this, you know. They don't even, you know, very seldom you ever find a dairy herd or a big dairy that has a bull on the place. Everything, 99% of it's artificial bred. Well, you know, we can spread the genetics through the sire side very easily. But, you know, when you think about the time it takes to produce a female and get her in production, you're looking at probably close to 3 years, you know, from that side of it. Well, you know, on this embryo transfer, if we get lucky, you know, especially with hormones and things like this, that we can increase ovulation. Using all those, we can detect heat. We can know when animals are coming into heat. We can use AI. We had one cow. You probably may be familiar with Express Ranches at Yukon. You know, got the biggest seed stock producer in the world right here. And my grandson, he showed heifers that they'd go up there. Well, we got buying some of those heifers. You know, just buy half inners. We just wanted half inners because we didn't want to bring them home. But they keep them up there, and they do all of the collection, the whole works. And we had one heifer up there that they collected 61 viable embryos out of.
Wow.
61. You know, and they've got them in that nitrogen tank, and they'll use every one of them. You know, and that's pretty profitable. You know, when they can still do that. You know, but that's what you can do with embryo transfer. Now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot more to be said about that than what I'm telling you. You know, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of know-how. You got to be willing to do it. You got to be willing to put the time in to do it. You know, but from the standpoint of, you know, being able to improve production in a much shorter time, that's the advantage of it. You know, if we can go out here and have one of the best cows in the breed, you know, and use her to collect out of, we may increase her production by 20-fold the first breeding. You know, we can do that, you know. But that's what's happened, you know, and why we have so many, you know, best in the world. You know, we don't, you go into a lot of places, we don't have that technology, you know, at least at the point where they're doing it down on the farm, I put it that way.
Sure.
You know? And I can remember when we didn't do it down on the farm. It just maybe a few of the biggest, you know, that was willing to spend the money, that had the money, you know, at the early stages of this thing. But it was, again, one of those things that pretty much come through the university, you know. When I was in graduate school, we had I had one animal reproduction class that Dr. That guy was I thought one of the smartest people I ever knew, you know. And he went on, when he retired, developed his own company, this thing, when he already started it, you know. But I think we're really fortunate. We live in a time, and fortunately in a state that we're farming, we're farmers, we have people that support farming, you know. Oklahoma's a great farm state, you know. Maybe not be we may not have the best land in the world, but we can produce almost anything we want to. The big thing that we don't have control over is moisture. You know, in the country we live right here, if we could get adequate rain, we could produce about anything we want to grow here, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, right? And we
Absolutely.
could. We could even produce vegetable crops, you know, if we wanted to. But, you know, you produce whatever crop that, you know, the rainfall that you produce, you know. And wheat is basically a dryland crop. Cotton's a dryland crop. That's why we don't produce soybeans out here, you know. It takes a little better soil to grow soybeans, but it takes more moisture. You get on over in the eastern part of the state, you know, and they grow a lot of soybeans. Get up in the corn belt, mostly beans and corn, you know. But they get a lot more rain up there. We do get a lot more snow. So moisture is still a big thing, you know. But in irrigation anymore, you know, they grow a lot of corn out in the panhandle, irrigation, but I don't know what's going to happen now, but the cost of energy, you know, to run those pumps is almost the point where it don't, almost not feasible, you know, and we didn't think we'd ever see that. But I don't know, you know, with this oil thing like it is, it may affect natural gas, and mostly natural gas what they use, you know. So.
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
But really, you know, I think another thing that you talk to anybody in our business is the fact that the two things that control our business that we have absolutely no control over is markets and rainfall. You know, we can't control either one of them. You know, and so we have to take. You know, the only place or only business I know of that you produce a crop, you take it to market, and you take what they're willing to pay you. What else can you do? You know, if we store it, first thing we know, we get more tied up in storage, and it goes to cutting in on what we can get for it. So it's just a business that we have to learn to accept, and hopefully, you know, and the old saying is, you know, if it's not very good, well, it'll sure be better next year.
At least we hope so.
Yeah, that's what we always say. Isn't it? But anyhow, I think it's a way of life. It's a way most of us was born and raised in, you know, and I think it's one of the greatest lives in the world. I don't think I would have stayed in it. You know, I have a lot of people, you know, just can't imagine why people would farm, but you know, somebody has to produce food. That's
So
something, you know.
You're not retiring anytime soon?
Oh, you know, I may be, and you know, I've been really fortunate. Like I say, I've been retired now 16 years. You know, every May I put in another year because that's when we get out of school. You know, I've had have a few health problems. Physically, I can still get out. Here several years ago, had some teeth work done, and I don't know whether it was that, but I've been having a lot of headache problems. You know, and I went. This big hospital down at Temple, Texas, Scott and White, it's kind of well known. Then we went down there about a year and different neurologists, and finally they just told me they didn't know anything that they could help me with. So I've been having some trouble there, but I think, you know, there's always going to come a time when a person's going to have to, but you know, we have all of our, we can farm a lot. We got good machinery, you know, we got good tractors. You sit out there with the tractor and air conditioner and a radio, and, you know.
A lot easier these days.
Oh, man. I remember my first combine, you know, I didn't even have a cab on it, you know, and sit out there in that dirt. But it makes it a lot easier, and, you know, you spend, like I think another thing in this no-till crop production, you know, when you go to looking at tractor, you go buy a tractor. I got a 79 model tractor out here. You figure that out. That's 30-something years old, but we've taken good care of it. A tractor of that, you know, size right now costs you $250,000. You know, you gotta need to, you know, pay a lot of income tax before you can go forward to buy a deal like that. You know, that's when the ones you see, you know, that are driving those tractors, it's probably because of the deal, you know. But that's good because they made money. But yeah, it's not nearly like it used to be, you know, when we first started out. And you know, I maintained, you know, my family. They still, you know, support me. They think it's great, you know, as long as I feel like doing it. And you know, if you're hurting, I don't know as you would hurt any more out there on that tractor as you would if you're sitting right here, you know, and you're doing something. I told my wife here not long ago, we had one of them old, really dreary, cold, wet days, and you know, you know, I got up and went and fed. Of course, in that kind of weather, you still have to get out and feed your cattle, you know. And you come in, and man, the day just drags on and drags on. And I told her, I said, you know, I guess if we ever retire totally, every day is going to be just like this, you know. But maybe it won't. But you know, you're used to getting out and doing things, you know. I think that's why you try to keep going, you know, as long as you can. If that's what you want to do and feel like doing, and want, you know. And it's still, you know, it's been, we still make, you know, it's been profitable. This cattle thing
keeps you busy.
Oh yeah, and I'm telling you, this cattle deal right now, we did sell back some during that drought period. We had to sell a truckload of cows, but and that's when I cut back some of my school land, school leases, and farming pretty much our deeded places, you know. But yeah, it does. I think, you know, I think a good example of that, my doctor, when I retired out there, of course he knew that I farmed, and so that I went to him after I retired and went out there, and he said, well, boy, that's great. He said, you can just farm full time now, can't you? And I said, yeah, and I did. But he said, you know, let me tell you, he said I had a soldier, you know, come in and told him he was retiring from the military. And he said, well, what are you going to do? You know, he said, well, I'm not going to do nothing. He said, I'm going to retire. You know, he said he lived about 3 years, you know. And, you know, if you just come in and sit down and don't do nothing, that's pretty much what I do. You know, your mind, you don't stay active, you know. So, but anyhow, that's certainly my opinion. That's not necessarily, you know, the case.
Well, when you look back at your time at OSU, how did earning your degrees impact your life?
Well, of course, where I've studied higher education, it's been totally my life. You know, really, I wouldn't have ever been able to do what I've been able to do in my profession without, you know, going to college and getting even advanced degrees. You know, that was the first thing I had to do when I got here was to finish my master's. I didn't even at that time. Well, you know, in 1965, the only person on campus with a doctor's degree was the president. You know, the rest of them. And in fact, I you know, put in. I found out about it. In fact, the guy that was here, there was just two in the ag department, Mr. Thomas, and he was a friend of ours where we were raised, or you know. So he said, I told him, he said, yeah, if you want to apply, we'd be happy to take your application. He said, I can't give you much hope, you know, without you not finished your master's. So I did, and we rocked along there. Well, you know, they started school there in September, and he called me about 2 weeks, and he said, well, you know, they still haven't hired anybody for that opening, and he said that I still can't give you much hope. I said, well, whatever. I said, that's what I was going for the extension trip. So, you know, if you've got a job, and, you know, it's different than waiting for a job and not have one. So, finally, one day, I was out in the county, and I came by the house for lunch, and I walked in the door, and the telephone was ringing. And I went over there and answered the phone, and it was Mr. Thomas, and he said the president called him and said if I was still interested in coming over there and teaching, for him to come over, he wanted to talk to me. And I came over there, and like I say, he was, I mean, back then, the president, he run everything. I mean, that was just, you know. And I went in and talked to him, sat down there and talked to him about 30 minutes, kind of like we've been sitting here visiting. I guess we finally ran out of anything to talk about, and he said, well, Glenn tells me that you're interested in coming over and, you know, teaching here at Cameron. And I told him I thought I'd enjoy it. I went to a junior college. He said, well, as he said, Edna Joe was his secretary, and he said, well, go in there and tell or give Edna Joe whatever information that you need, and be here first day of school. Never, your education never come up or anything, you know, and like I say, that turned into about a 35-year deal, you know. But didn't have my master's, and I found out later that, you know, they had a whole stack of resumes, and a lot of them were, you know, foreign students, and, you know, and back in those days. And he just wasn't interested. He wanted to hire an old farm boy, and I guess he found him when I come by. But it's sure been, like I say, when you mention, you know, how this has affected my life as far as, and I really give OSU all the credit. I mean, you know, I got a good education, what I think, and I never really had a lot of trouble, you know, with grades and classes. So I was fortunate in that respect, you know, and I enjoyed college. And I still enjoyed teaching, you know. I don't think I could have ever made it in the high school run of it. I don't, but I don't know if you want to be in education, how it could be any better than it would be at the college level, really, you know. And I don't have any regrets. I really don't, you know. And,
well, we took this really quick fast forward through your life. What are we missing? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Well, you know, when you look back, I'm sure a lot of people second guess. You know, if I'd have known this or something, I might have done something else. And you know, and I still say, where we were so closely involved in the farming industry, that's where we made our living, you know. When I went to high school, I was in 4-H club and FFA when we were youngsters. Went to high school, we never told anything about, you know, we were from the farm, you know. I guess we were expected to be involved in agriculture. I loved the livestock show part of it, you know. That was the height of the year when we got to go to the stock shows, you know. And when we got out of high school, we went off to school and studied agriculture, and never really, I guess, give it too much thought, you know. And that's the way it turned out. And I don't know, I would probably change it now. If I'd have known back then, I might have done something else, but I really doubt it, you know. I had a brother, one of my brother, that died very young. Had a head injury with a bull one time, and then had another brother that got out of high school and went to work for Rural Electric, worked 40 years. I was the only one that really stayed in the farming and agriculture business, you know, as far as that's concerned. But I don't know.
No regrets.
Not really. I don't think I really would say I had any regrets. I've got so many really, really good friends, you know, in the ag. I know so many people, you know, when you consider that I've been in Cameron. We went to a co-op meeting last night up at Apache, and so many of those guys are former students, are working in the cooperative services and things like that, you know, and you know, you get part of your I think you get part of your pay when you think about, you know, we knew that as long as we worked for the state of Oklahoma, we wasn't going to get rich. Mm-hmm. But you know, when you look back and you look back at the number of people that you've had some influence on, I think, in their lives, and a lot of them gone out in the ag industry too, just like we did, you know. You can sure find something to talk about when you run onto them, you know. I think that's a big contribution. I mean, that's a big payback, you know, to some degree, as far as what we've done in our, you know.
Oh, sure. Especially, you know, with a 35-year career teaching,
yeah,
you've had a chance to impact a lot of lives.
Yeah, we know a lot of people. And you know, not that this is of any significance, but over that period of years, you know, I've got students that are already retired. I mean, really, a full career. You know, those students that I had when I came here, you know, have completed a full career that are retired. You know, and that's kind of fun. You know, to talk to them, what they've done for so long. Goodyear, you know, has got a big guitar plant here. You know, and we've had a lot of our students that when they come in, that dropped out of school and went to work for Goodyear, you know, and that's been a good company to work for. Not that we've had any, you know, contribution to it, but I think it's a thing that still, when you think about, you know, where they worked for a company for so long, and that's just another example. But I'm really one that don't have a lot to, you know, still enjoying it, you know. I think another thing, you know, that just like, you know, we're fortunate to live out in a place like this. You know, you turn the television on and, my golly, everybody knows what's going on. I get to thinking, you know, my God, if we weren't living out here in down at Hewlin, it's no longer here, you know, at least we're not that close to that kind of deal, you know what I'm saying, you know, and how much better, more wholesome place to live could you find in a place like this right here? You know, not just because we got it, but you think about it. You know, we have we have a new car to drive, and we have a nice home to live in, and we have good friends, and we have, I hope, you know, adequate retirement to take care of our needs. So, you know, and all of that has been due to the fact that we had enough staying power to go through school and get us a college degree and get out in my case anyhow, to do something I wanted to do. You know? And like I say, I can give everybody mine pretty much to the ability, the fact that I was able to go ahead and finish my college education, college degree. And that's what we tried to, you know, inflame our kids, and they've all done pretty much the same thing. You know, they've had good jobs. So what more can you ask for?
Well, I think that's a good place to end, Mr. Kennedy. I appreciate you taking time out talking.
I hope it's something, you know, that, you know, really, that's pretty much the way we've had it, you know, up through the years.